horror movie and staged events production at Moorhole Studios, Gaumont, British Animation. This is the Ralph Wright special. And here's where some of the slides came from. And here's contact information. The link where I found a series of photographs from Moorhole Studios. And by definition, this is Ralph Wright. So, as I mentioned in one of my other videos, he looked extremely familiar, but in this one I explained that he is a Disney animator, storyboard writer. He has endless credentials, lived from 1908 to 1983, pioneered the use of gags. Here he is. He won a Winnie the Pooh award. And there are only a handful of pictures of him. Here's a very nice picture of him at about 30 degrees. And here's a 45 degree. You got a nice big ear here. I don't know if they did anything. Some teeth showing. And sort of a nondescript, geeky looking guy. However, he is the great Ralph Wright. So who is he? And how do I recognize him? Well, this actually resembled to me Bela Lugosi. And in fact, I prove and will prove to you that he is in fact Bela Lugosi, who played Dracula in the 1931 film Dracula. So what I did was studied some of the other people in the photograph here. By the way, this is sort of a rehash of my videos number 1 through 4, but there's a couple things I wanted to add in here. So this guy was probably my favorite of the lot, though everybody in here is pretty interesting. He was called Doug Lowe, and he also happens to be Ed Wood. Ed Wood turns up in a bunch of directs a bunch of later films with Bela Lugosi in it. They're considered B films, low grade, but they've turned into very popular and watched films, and it should be impossible for Bela Lugosi and Ed Wood to be in the same photograph, and I'll explain why later. Here his face looks kind of flat and broad, has to do with what's called lens distortion. Here it's got a more rounded feature. Same here, some more rounded, a little more flat. Has to do with how the photograph is taken. If it's close up, you're going to get a more rounded view. This is a distance shot, and everybody gets this kind of flat look to them. Nobby Clark was Dr. Frankenstein, Colin Clive. So again, we find 3 people now associated with the horror film industry. Guy's name's Gary. Nobody remembers his last name. Why should they? He was only Peter Cushing, and he's still alive. Still alive. Hitching turns out to be makeup artist Jack P. Pierce. Obviously, Jack is older here, but you can see the same beautiful widow's peak on the hair. Whether this is his actual hair at this point, I can't tell you, but this is the same man years later. Reg Partlett confused me for a while, and I highly suspected, I still believe, he's Lewis Hayward, a.k.a. son of Dr. Jekyll. Why did he confuse me? Because I believe later on he becomes Spencer Tracy, which is interesting. This gentleman here, well, I'll move on. The woman standing here is Eileen Tierney, and I believe she went through him throughout life and changed his names. Lillian Arch over here, I suspect the same woman, and Hope Lininger. You can see the same nose and features. This is Nick Spargo, and I wrestled with putting in here or not, and I decided I had to do it. There's a whole special on him, video number 21, and I get more crap about this guy than probably anybody else because he turns out to be George Reeves. There's 3 photos of Nick Spargo at Moorhole Studios. He's younger here. This is an older George Reeves, which takes place later than this photograph. He matures. They do some repairs on his teeth, but this is the same man. All right, here's everybody defined. Oh, here it is. Pete Griffiths here. This guy turns out to be Norman Torrig, who directs Spencer Tracy in Boys Town. All right. All right, we come back to this Ed Wood, which again was my favorite. So here's Ed Wood, and you may have a hard time believing it's the same guy. Again, it has to do with lens distortion here, but again, you have a rounded features here. And again, I'm defining this as Bela Lugosi, and I'm finding everybody else at the party. This one's easier to see, even aspects of the same mustache, same deep set eyes, dark hair. And supposedly later on in life, Bela Lugosi, by definition Bela here, develops a morphine addiction and then makes his films with Ed Wood and winds up dying a lonely, broken old man. Well, in fact, it didn't happen like that because it's a stage. This is Bela Lugosi getting a nice morphine injection, but it's not real. It's staged. How do we know it's staged and not true? Because this guy over here is Ben Gazzara. Now, you would have had to grow up seeing Ben Gazzara movies to recognize him, but this is the guy. He's an actor. He's not a doctor. It's a staged photograph. And here Bela warns Ben, careful with that needle, Ben, or I'm going to shove it up your tuchus. So, again, Ralph Wright by definition. And Bela Lugosi here dies in 1956. Ralph Wright supposedly dies in 1968. Whether he dies in 68 or not, I don't know. It's hard to figure out anything. But the pictures are dramatically similar. And again, I've identified the other people here. Ralph Wright does the voice of Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh. So we have Ralph Wright here. Nope, Bela Lugosi here. Ralph Wright, Dracula, Ralph Wright, and doing the voice of Eeyore. All right. This is a guy named Alex Oxley from Warhol Studios. If you want to pause it, think if you can figure out who this is. You got to brace yourself, because this is Boris Karloff over here, who also turns up in a number of photos at Warhol Studios, and Alex Oxley was Boris Karloff, who played Frankenstein's monster. Doesn't play Frankenstein. Frankenstein is played by Colin Clive, or Clive Colin, and he plays the monster of Dr. Frankenstein. I hated to do this, but it had to be done. So Alex Oxley is Frankenstein's monster. Ralph Wright, a.k.a. Bela Lugosi, is Dracula. And here they're both drawing cartoons because the studio that Gaumont British Animation did films, but they're really cartoons. And nobody knew that they were making major full-length motion pictures there as well. It doesn't reveal that. And again, here, not only is he drawing cartoons, but he's the voice of Eeyore. And here, Alex Oxley, who is Boris Karloff, did the voice over in The Grinch Who Stole Christmas. So it's just a great combination of very talented people who are not just actors, but they're artists. And they're doing voices as well. So this slide really kind of sums it up. This was a picture I found at Warhol Studios, which I put on a back burner because I never thought I'd figure any of it out. But here, by definition, this is Ralph Wright. So I tell you that's Ralph Wright, Ray Patterson, Joan Patton, A.W. Chick Henderson. I think I've got him, and another unnamed person. So I figured, Ralph Wright, Dracula, Bela Lugosi, is sort of manhandling this woman. He's got his arm around her, and it's not his wife. So who is she? So I had to figure she was in one of the movies that Bela Lugosi was in. There's a nice picture of Bela Lugosi. You can see the similarities. It's not going to be identical because this is a head-on shot and this is on an angle, but it's close enough for now. So we have to figure out who Joan Patton is. So I pull up three different women getting bitten on the neck by Dracula, a.k.a. Bela Lugosi, a.k.a. Ralph Wright. This is Frances Dade, Frina in Escort, and Helen Chandler. So we're going to try and figure out which one it is. We do one at a time. This is Frances Dade here getting bit, and this is not really a very good match. She's blonde-haired, and it was low on my list. Frida in Escort, and here not a great match again with Ralph Wright over here. The hair is dark. This hair is you can't see in black and white, but it looks kind of auburn. And here we pull up Helen Chandler. Tricky, very, very tricky, but this is probably it. Now, you say, all right, they don't look alike. I mean, she's got a thin face here, but let's look at the hair. Again, the hair is a pretty good match. Nice, shiny, lustrous, probably some sort of auburn with some nice curls running through it. So the hair is a good match, but it's not perfect. It's not close enough, and I would never figure it out without looking at some more photos. So here I dig up, by definition, the three women, one, two, and three. All three of these are Helen Chandler, by definition. So here's Helen Chandler with George O'Brien, Helen Chandler with Bela Lugosi, and Helen Chandler here with Frances Dade. All right. Now, you can see they all look real different. I don't think you'd be able to tell that this was the same woman if I put three photos down, but by definition, all three of these women are Helen Chandler. So I only have one picture of this woman, and I am going to, let me make sure, yep. I'm going to make my best judgment that this was Helen Chandler. Again, I showed the hair was reasonably identical, reasonably close. The chin points out a little bit. Here you see the chin pointing out. Whether that's really her chin or it's a prosthetic added on, I can't say. But it's the same chin pointing out. Here she's plumped up a little bit. Maybe she's had a kid at this point. The cheekbones. I think it's probably the closest of the three. And again, I would go out on a limb and say that this is very likely her. All right, here's another photo of Ralph Wright that shows up. So again, other than telling you he shows up here, and I haven't identified this guy yet, but I'm working on him. This is Ralph Wright. It's Bela Lugosi, who played Dracula. Now, interestingly enough, Ralph Wright's name, his middle name, is Ralph Waldo Wright. So just for the heck of it, I decided to look up Ralph Waldo Emerson. Got a nice picture of the guy. Not so bad, not so far off features, but the age wouldn't have been right for this to be his son. So I pulled up one other character, Edward Waldo Emerson, who's the son of Ralph Waldo Emerson. Ralph Waldo Emerson had a daughter as well. And in fact, it's not a bad match, whether they're all related or not, but it's no accident that they put the word Waldo in the middle of it, and it's Ralph Waldo Wright. Here's Ralph Waldo Emerson. Again, I don't believe he is the direct son, but I think there's a fairly decent look between the three of these men. I mean, you know, same long faces, huge nose, long ears, that this is probably a relative of Ralph Waldo Emerson. It's the name game. They do this in a lot of ways, in a lot of places. And I'm going to end on this slide. Again, the great Ralph Wright is over here, extremely talented. Turns out to be Bela Lugosi, who is Dracula in 1931, the original Dracula, voice of Eeyore. And over here, I leave Alex Oxley, a.k.a. Boris Karloff, a.k.a. Frankenstein's monster, also voiceover for The Grinch Who Stole Christmas, probably the two most famous men in all of horror film history.